Looks like the red light's on. Are we go?
We are go for lunch.
All right. Good evening. Welcome to the March 22nd, 2021 Henrietta Town Board Workshop Meeting. Please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Here.
Councilmember Stafford,
Here.
Councilmember Safranek,
Here.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Here.
Supervisor Schultz.
Here. We'll begin with the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. So for the special use permit meeting, there are 11 special use permits and hearings. And then there'll be two at the, there are two at the meeting itself. Since we've already advertised for it, we're going to hold the public hearing for what everyone refers to as the Delphi complex. However, we're pulling the resolutions. We've asked the developer to make some adjustments, get stuff. There were some, as we've put requirements on them, some things have changed. We need them to go back and update the EAF.
Okay.
So they'd originally said they'd like to pull it from the meeting. I said, well, they're not going to do any kind of presentation, but we'll at least hear what's up. But as far as I'm aware, all the other ones are on. Tonight we have Walt from EDR is going to go over the supplemental, the draft supplemental GEIS for incentive zoning and solar. Because on Wednesday, will basically be the formal presentation. Basically the process is it gets presented to the town board. We call for a public hearing. We essentially have to do a pause deck right on the seeker that causes it to basically go to the environmental impact study. And then we basically put forth the draft GEIS. Now, again, this is meant to be a supplemental to the one that we had done as part of the comprehensive land use update plan, because when we did that, we were working on incentive zoning and solar at that time, but we had a deadline because of the ending of the moratorium. So we kind of punted on these two with the idea that we would pick them up again. And then COVID hit. So we had made good progress up through that, and then, you know, again, it's still moved forward, but not at the rate as it probably otherwise would have. So, Walt, I saw you were on earlier.
Yeah.
Go ahead and present.
Okay. Thanks, Steve.
Hi, Walt.
Hey, Walt. Hi, everyone.
Hello.
So I'm sharing my screen. Can everyone see that?
Yep.
There we go.
Better. Okay. So as Steve said, tonight I just want to give you some of the major steps in the seeker process, where we stand with the preliminary draft of the supplemental GEIS, and where we go from here. So these are just some of the brief key points of seeker, and right now what we're in is we're in the process of finalizing the draft supplemental GEIS. So that's number 4 down on this list. The next important step for the town board is to formally deem the draft GEIS, the draft supplemental GEIS, as complete. And by doing that, you're basically acknowledging that it is in good enough shape so that it can be made available to the public for public and agency comment. After that process is completed, then the document is available for public review. A public hearing will be held and a public comment period of not less than 30 days. And that will then lead to preparation of a final supplemental GEIS where we respond to all substantive comments and then a seeker's finding statement, and then the process is complete. So here, just to refresh everyone's memory about what is the description of the action. Basically, there's two parts to the action: modifying the current town solar energy regulations that are contained within the ordinance as passed by local law in 2017. And then establishing an incentive zoning is allowed under New York Town Law, Section 261B. That action includes modification of the existing town's current open space incentive option. So in a sense, the town already has incentive zoning. This would be expanding it to other areas of the town. An important thing to keep in mind as we're going through the process is that the overriding goal of the town is intended to encourage the protection and the conservation of important resources. That includes open space, agriculture, valuable resources that we basically consider to be environmentally sensitive, such as wetlands and floodplains, and enhanced community character. These were all issues of importance that were identified in the update to the comprehensive land use plan in 2018 and 2019. And certainly the community had identified those issues going back as early as 2003. Incentive zoning, as I indicated, it's allowed under state law, Section 261B. And just really quickly, it's a process by which the town can offer certain incentives to an applicant, to a developer, in exchange for that applicant or developer to provide some type of a benefit back to the community. Typically, the incentives are adjustments to the dimensional requirements of the zoning ordinance, things like area dimensions or height requirements, open space requirements, which we're including in the proposed legislation, and other provisions through the zoning law. Community benefits that are provided by a developer in exchange for the incentives often include open space, affordable housing for low and moderate income, parks, elder care, daycare, and other types of amenities, or cash in lieu of that. And we had talked about that at our last meeting. This is just an incentive zoning summary table that we've included in the preliminary draft. And it basically, it actually shows quite a bit of information. And this is something that we need to make sure that the entire board is comfortable with before the draft is deemed complete. Basically what this table shows is the four, excuse me? Okay, basically what this shows are the four different incentive zones that are being established within the town. These are on the upper part of the table. That includes the rural residential area, the commercial revitalization zone, neighborhood upgrade zone, and historic property zone. In that line that says involved zoning districts, those are the actual zoning districts that are affected by each of those incentive zones. The rural residential incentive zone actually follows the precise boundaries of the rural residential zoning district. The commercial revitalization incentive zone follows the commercial B1 and B2 zoning districts. The neighborhood upgrade is available to all zoning districts in the town, and the historic properties incentives are available to all zoning districts in the town. On the left side of the table, you can see all the different types of incentives. In the first part the upper half of the table, the open space incentive option, which basically we've provided quite a bit of emphasis on in the preliminary draft and in the draft of the local laws, quite a bit of emphasis on single family residential density bonuses through conservation subdivisions. And I'll show you some examples of those in a few minutes. And that is exclusive to the rural residential zoning district in the southern half of the town. The reason for that is because that is the area of the town where you have the most open space still available to protect and conserve on a permanent basis. And then you can see going down that list on the left-hand side, the various types of incentives that would be offered to a developer. And in the middle part of the table, under those 4 columns, you can see what is available for each of those different 4 incentive zones. On the right side of the table, you can just see some of the notes that you would have to consider in providing those incentives. In the second half of the table, down on the bottom, split by the blue line, we have the community benefits and amenities. These again would be offered by incentive zone. And you can see the types of community benefits again that would be provided by a developer, such as permanent preservation, conservation of open space, agricultural lands, creation of public parks, trails, recreational facilities, historic preservation of historic properties, senior housing for low and middle income, and then down the line. Again, this is an important part of the draft supplemental GEIS because it really does basically lay out the entire purpose and what's available through the incentive zoning process. So incentive zoning, a lot of people may be asking, why do we have to go through an EIS? And it's basically because incentive zoning under town law requires that you consider the impacts of incentive zoning on the community and the environment. And that for any area that you are considering incentive zoning, those areas have to have adequate resources to supply any type of development. And that comes in the way of water, wastewater, public services like fire and police, those types of things that are listed on the bottom of the slide. So the seeker steps. One of the important things for the town board is that the supplement needs to identify where the original draft and final GEIS are available, and that's on your E-code web link. It's important so that anyone reviewing the supplemental draft EIS can go back and look at the original 2019 draft and final GEIS to compare and contrast what was discussed then. And then in the seeker handbook, which came out last year, it's just some points for the town board to consider when developing a supplement to a generic EIS like we're doing. And that's referencing the original GEIS. So you will see quite a bit of that reference in the preliminary draft, summarizing its relevant sections and indicating where you can find the copy of that GEIS in that E-code web link. Incorporating mitigation and alternatives that were recommended in the GEIS. So in the preliminary supplemental, we are actually using a lot of the same mitigation for potential impacts that we had identified back in 2019. In 2019, when we adopted zoning modifications, a lot of what we did was establish criteria for reviewing and permitting projects. And so we're still looking to use those types of criteria for considering the action, whether that's solar energy or the incentive zoning. These are the main components of the draft supplemental, and it follows the exact same type of outline. It's just a little bit shorter than the original GEIS, where we discuss the purpose and need, the study area, which is the entire town, description of the action, which is done in quite a bit of detail. Our plan is to have the description of the action in chapter 1, and then the actual language of the proposed laws solar energy in Appendix A of the draft, and in Appendix B, we would have the language of the local law for incentive zoning. Chapter 2, again, relies on the original GEIS in terms of the environmental setting, the types of impacts that may be possible, and then mitigation if those impacts are identified. And then Chapter 3, according to seeker, you have to identify other types of impacts, alternatives to your proposed action, and then what happens in the seeker process, both before and after this process is completed. So basically, the thing to remember is the proposed action is an administrative action, just like when we did the original GEIS in 2019, where we adopted local laws and modified the zoning ordinance. We're doing the exact same thing here. So there really are not direct adverse impacts on the environment or the community from this action. And the overall conclusion of the supplemental draft is that no significant adverse impacts are going to be anticipated from the action. However, once incentive zoning kicks in and solar energy projects are proposed, then we have to consider what those very site-specific or project-specific actions might create in terms of impacts. So those types of things have to be considered in future seeker actions, not this action. And again, I just want to emphasize that when we developed the language for the proposed local laws, we had a lot of meetings and a lot of conversations, and a lot of the notes that I took in those meetings and conversations, that's what's showing up in the preliminary draft about how to deal with potential future site-specific projects. You'll see in the draft quite a bit of descriptions of subdivision development, especially in the southern half of the town where you still have a lot of open space. You have large parcels of land that may be attractive for subdivision development. This is really where the town has a real opportunity to promote what is called conservation subdivisions. And this is a nice graphic prepared out of the Regional Planning Commission in southeastern Wisconsin. At the upper half of the illustration is a conventional subdivision, and you can see, how the houses are provided on big lots, and they basically, go up into, some of these areas up here in the northern part of this lot. Regardless of what the slope of the terrain is. And under this conventional subdivision, it's 97 acres. You have 19 lots that are broken out. The density comes out to one dwelling unit, one house per 5 acres. That's over the entire 97 acres. It's an average lot size of 4 acres, but there is no common open space. This is a conventional subdivision. This is the type of thing that in upstate New York, we're very aware of. Also, the thing to note on this illustration is that from the road, you can see that all of these are large lot homes. And so you can see from the road that these are all developed properties. On the bottom half of the illustration is the conservation subdesign alternative, which we're promoting. And this is actually something that's been promoted under the town's open space incentive option. But to my knowledge, no conservation subdivisions have yet been developed within the community, but we're really trying to address that through this legislation and encourage people to consider this. In this illustration, you can see we're still dealing with the same property, 97 acres. We've divided out 19 lots, just like we did up above. The density still comes out to be one dwelling unit per 5 acres based upon the overall acreage of the site. However, the average lot size has dropped from 4 acres to 3/4 of an acre. And now we have 80% of all of this property that can be set aside for conservation. Things like, all this, the woodland down here, the steep slopes, The possibility of woodlands and, maybe some wetlands up in here, horse pastures down in here. Another thing to note, like I mentioned before, is you have these views along the roadway, and you can see that the views are very different between the two alternatives, where this one looks at the upper one looks at a traditional suburban development. This one looks at a much more rural looking development. So this is the type of thing that we're promoting in the rural residential district. And it's just one aspect of the incentive zoning to encourage conservation design practices. This is another graphic, and this comes out of your existing rural development design guidelines. I think they go back to like 2005, if I'm not mistaken. Again, this is just showing, again, conceptually how you can address suburban development. All of this farmland would be preserved. You have concentrated development here in the center of the site. You have areas along the roadway that preserve the rural character of the area. You might have a historic farmstead up in here that's preserved. So it really is still allowing a property owner, a developer to develop property, but on smaller lots. And then you have all of this conserved land, and the land might be agriculturally conserved in perpetuity for agriculture, or it could be open space corridors or other types of land that would be preserved for public use, like trails. Just to wrap up, so the next steps are really for the town board and the town attorney to review the preliminary draft supplemental. We'll make whatever revisions are noted, and then the town board needs to determine that that draft is complete and ready for public review. The town then provides a notice of completion to the DEC. That's the environmental notice bulletin that typically comes out on Wednesdays. And it will make public that the document is ready for public review. At the same time, once it's deemed complete, we have to have that supplemental GEIS made available on the town website, and there would be some hard copies available at the library and at the town hall. Once it's available too, we'd have a comment period established, and that's typically a minimum of 30 days. For whatever reason, the town may want to extend that. That's a possibility, but you at least have to provide a 30-day minimum for public comment and review. Once that is done, as I mentioned earlier, then we would take all the comments that were received on the draft and then respond to those comments and prepare a final supplemental GEIS. Again, go through that same process of publishing it in the ENB. And then you have to wait at least a minimum of 10 days once that notice is filed, and then the town board would submit its findings, which basically is probably the most important part of the entire seeker process, because it basically is committing what the town is going to be doing in terms of future projects and how they will ensure that those future projects either avoid or minimize adverse impacts to the community. That, in a nutshell, is where we are. Questions?
Just a couple comments. So one of the things in the conservation clustering, this is essentially modifying and/or replacing portions of the town code with regards to the open space incentive program. If you recall, there were some number issues as well as confusion as to whether you could, under the way it was currently written, I can do a conservation cluster and then I can do, or I could use the open space incentives and then I could apply the a traditional clustering plan. What we've basically said in here is that you have to choose one or the other. With that said, we fixed some of the problems with the conservation clustering because some of the minimum lot sizes, the reason people were forced to do that clustering afterwards, if you took the minimum lot sizes, multiplied it out by the number of lots you got, you sometimes came up negative in terms of percentage of land left over for roads to actually get to the homes. So there were some issues with the minimum lot sizes when you got into the higher end of the table. There was also one offering that we kind of eliminated because it was sort of you got some extra houses and you really didn't give much more for it above what you would get under the normal process. So it made no sense to give, if you're not really preserving a whole lot more space, it made no sense to give an incentive. So that, like I said, that we cleaned some of that up. And again, the correct term now, instead of open space incentive program, it's under conservation clustering. And then our action at this meeting is to call for the public hearing, right? But we'll also be issuing the POS deck. Is that correct, Don?
Right. On that, set a public hearing for the DGIS. We can also set a public hearing for the laws, which are appendices, which are in the appendices to this.
Okay.
I don't know if that makes a lot of sense, only because we're still a little far out.
I would do that with the final. As we get closer. We're going to have time because again, that starts that 30-day clock. So during that 30-day clock, I think we can hold for the local law. That way, if we get any significant feedback that changes our thinking on this, I'd rather do that before we draft the local laws. But obviously, if you have some free cycle and want to get a head start on getting them ready to go, that's not a bad idea.
So, go ahead.
Sorry, is it possible for us to get a copy of what he presented to us, emailed to us, so that we have it to review, at our leisure?
Yes, absolutely.
Thank you.
So, Don, had you had a chance to look it over to see if it's ready to go to the town board? It looked fine by me. The thing Walt sent out today?
Yeah, I would let it fly.
Okay.
Yeah.
So Walt, go ahead and send it to the town board or actually, why don't I just have Jenny, if you could forward that on to the town board, that'd be great.
Thank you.
Yeah, that was already in the plan. I just hadn't had a chance to catch up with Don and Walt. So
So I have a question.
what's that?
And I think I kind of know, but I want to make sure. So by issuing the negative declaration, we are, as an agency, as a lead agency, indicating to implement the action, and that's why it goes to the conservation board?
So and Don, correct me where I stray, the POS deck basically says that we're not going to do it as just part of the normal, what I'll call normal EAF process. We're kicking it out to an environmental impact study or statement because code changes to zoning has a potential large impact.
Yeah.
It's believed that you have to do it through the more extensive EIS process.
Yeah, the incentive zoning authority in state law actually requires us to do it this way. Even if we were all here to agree and take the position that the incentive zoning is a good thing, not only for the town in general, but for the environment, say we took that position. And so we wanted to issue a negative declaration. The law actually requires us to issue the POS deck and do it this way. So that's why Walt's been working on this report. And all this means is that now we get into the lengthy seeker process with the longer reports and things. Okay. You might remember we did this with the comprehensive plan. We did like the long reports. A lot of work went into it from Walt's firm. And this is the same thing here. If you look at what Walt's put together, it's pretty comprehensive.
And this will be essentially, it's a supplement to what we had done previously. So, ultimately what I'd like to see is if I pull up the comprehensive plan, it will have let me rephrase it. If I pull up the GEIS for the comprehensive plan, once this is approved, this will be essentially an addendum added on so that, because again, it's really supplementing that. we're not doing it as a full standalone. It's sort of on the back of all the work that we had done
Right.
in 2018 and 2019.
So because of that, are we not going to, we had a little committee, you know, of residents that helped out on the comprehensive plan. Are we not, no, because it's just a portion of that?
Because again, we actually talked about this stuff during those committees.
Right.
We just never had the time to formalize it. And if you recall, in fact, the solar codes are what we used for remote because we didn't have it in place. We made it, 18 stipulations on their special use permit, but essentially it was this code. So it was developed, but we didn't want to rush it. But the other stuff had to get done in order to deal with the housing moratorium, which we felt it was an undue burden to extend that yet another time. So like I said, we'd actually already had those committee public meetings and discussions on this stuff. There's obviously been some refinement since then. Because one of the things that came out of those discussions with the incentive zoning, a couple things, we wanted to be very careful in terms of the cash in lieu of, and specifically it needs to be targeted towards something, right? We don't want to get it to where the town basically says, oh, well, yeah, if you want to put this in, you need to give us cash, right? But an example of that is, for instance, the East River Road corridor, right? Whereas the project itself is too big to be borne by one project, it's borne out by other stuff. But it could also be things like that they're what I refer to as a drag along infrastructure. They're going to put in a water main, but it has to wait until something else has to happen. So we can collect the money up front to do that work. They can move forward with their stuff and then the work gets done later on. But I don't want it to be, again, you want to avoid, call it the temptation of having that ability to just take cash. And then the other thing we wanted to be careful of too is, which is again why we didn't rush this through, was how can we craft it such that people didn't get incentives for stuff they were going to do anyway, right? And so we've talked about this, and again, I'm going to go back to the East River Road corridor. I realize it's slightly different, but similar type of thing. We talked about, well, if you're putting in a development and I have to have a shoulder so people can turn into my development, that's a private improvement. That improvement is solely for your purpose. Whether we had the East River Road corridor or not, you'd have to do that. So there's no quote unquote credit for doing that. Whereas if I made an improvement, let's say just outside my entrance is an intersection that is currently failing, and I spend money to improve that intersection so it's better with or without my traffic, that's what we refer to as a local improvement. And that one you do get credit for. So it's the same kind of concept that we want to look at some of this stuff to make sure that you don't, you can't go and get incentives for things that you're required to do anyways, right? I can't get incentives for planting the required number of trees on my lot, right? But, if there was a big old historic tree, and they did a whole bunch of, there was extra cost or extra work to clear around to keep that tree in place and that type of stuff, you could say, let's say it's a development, you give them one extra house to essentially make up the extra income, if it's a residential subdivision. That way to cover the additional costs that they have to do in order to preserve that big old historic tree. That type of thing. So that's why, it's just with something like incentives zoning, with the solar, there was just a whole bunch of changes and the solar laws themselves were changing at the time. So we wanted to kind of wait to see where that all fell out. With incentive zoning, we punted it because, if you don't do it well, there's potential for abuse. So Don, Walt, myself, Chris, A couple others basically went over this multiple times, and, you know, we'd like you guys to look through it too and think about how can this be abused? And, you know, we'll ask the public the same thing, because if you spot something, we want to fix it before it goes into the code. Anything else, Walt?
I think if, I would just want to add that, you know, if you remember back to when we updated the comp plan and throughout that entire GEIS, there was a real emphasis on farmland preservation, open space preservation. And so what we're doing here with the proposed local laws is totally consistent with the comprehensive plan. You don't need to adopt any changes to your comprehensive plan. All of those goals that are laid out in there are totally consistent with what's being proposed here. So it's just a further implementation of your comprehensive plan.
All right, thanks, Walt. Thanks, Steve. Appreciate it.
Anybody else have any other questions for Walt or Don
Thank you,
or
Walt.
myself?
At the moment. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Walt.
Okay, thank you, folks.
Get out and enjoy the nice weather.
I'm going to try. Okay, thanks, guys.
Thanks, take care.
Yeah.
So again, 4 is basically going to be the resolution that does the pause deck and calls for the public hearing. Number 5, that's the in response to the public hearing. This is just the minor changes to the prohibited and permitted uses in industrials districts. To clarify a couple things, there is some potential ambiguity that would allow a dealership to go in to an industrial area, and whereas the intent of the town was always to limit it to West Henrietta Road between Jefferson and Lehigh. So we just want to make it ironclad, crystal clear. No, you can't put these into industrial zones. There was a slight wording change Don caught in one of the permitted uses in industrial zone is a service garage. The language that was basically in for a dealership was a dealer sales service, a sales showroom and service, or showroom sales and service, or whatever, those 3. We deleted service from there because we didn't want to create further ambiguity. So, I mean, obviously you can't have a dealership, but I could have a standalone service. So like, you know,
The tire place?
tire place, muffler, lube shop, that kind of thing.
How we, I know you got dealers out of there. How about, and we went through this on Jefferson Road prior for rental cars. We had that issue, and I thought we were going to do something about rental cars, that Jefferson Road wouldn't be allowed in the future to do that.
That's up to you guys. We can certainly add it.
I would suggest we did.
Is it any, so one of the things I want to take a look at, and I'll see if I can have that for Wednesday then, is what rental car facilities, because I know it wasn't supposed to be, that's the issue of whether they can sell from there was one, but is it just rental car facilities at all? One of the things I'd want to understand is, I know there's a number of them that are on West Henrietta Road in with the dealerships. I just don't know, are there, you know, like there was always one at the mall, although technically the mall does have frontage to West Henrietta Road, but, and it was when that one was closing down that they moved over to Jefferson.
Yeah, there was 2 issues. We didn't want to have any sales there, and the spacing of parking in that Frontier Commons there.
Yeah, so I mean, some of those were specific to that particular development in terms of where the spacing was, but I think there was sort of we didn't want to see, I guess it was that people didn't want to see fleets of trucks or vehicles, excuse me, elsewhere around town.
Yes, we probably should look at.
So I will see if I can find out what ones are existing in town already. If the only one that most recently handled one is the only grandfather, I'd feel a lot better about it. In other words, if I created 8 grandfathered parcels, I'd have a problem with that.
I don't know if there's a rental car place, is it Lehigh and West Henrietta? I'm not sure if it's a Lehigh address or West Henrietta, but they are.
The way the rule works, it doesn't matter what the address is. It matters whether it has frontage on Jefferson or excuse me, on West Henrietta Road. Okay, so let me make a note. Car rentals. And then again, some of the other stuff, we had greenhouses and nurseries and stuff like that, but we didn't include lawn. It didn't include landscaping services. So all the stuff that landscaping services can store, they just couldn't operate out of there, which makes no sense. And they always had to come in for a special use permit under the catch-all. So it just seems to me to make sense. If all the other stuff's allowed in industrial, why wouldn't we also include without having to come in for a special use permit?
Wasn't that Harris Seed right there on Jefferson?
Harris Seed used to be there forever. Yep. Yep. Any other questions on that one? So then up next after that is the Marketplace Mall. There's 2 special use permits related to that. One is the mixed use development, or MUD as I refer to it by shorthand. And that's the idea that basically the whole mall property itself is put in an application for mixed use development. That includes, industrial, obviously a lot of commercial, medical, and then residential, in this case, multifamily. The Central Mall, they're doing this one. If you remember, there's 2 ways to do it, either by acreage or by square footage of floor space. I suggested they do it by square footage of floor space because as far as I'm concerned, that Central Mall meets the civic space requirement, as well as they don't have it on their plans because they're not sure what they're going to do until after the dust settles from all the construction. But I encourage them also to look at, putting picnic tables out near one of the ponds, for instance, or something like that, to have some additional civic space. That's one of the applications, one of the hearings, but because again, with the complication of the approval has a bunch of conditions set on it, we moved it to the regular portion of the meeting. And then it also then includes the senior housing, specifically affordable senior housing. We're working with them right now, myself and the assessor, as well as regarding the pilot agreement. One of the things I will note, I'm not sure we're going to be able to do number 9. We're waiting to hear back from the director of real property at the county. The issue is it would be easy if they own the property. They don't. It's a lease, long-term ground lease, 40 plus years. There's in the Article 11 that they're doing this under, it doesn't mention ownership, but the county seems to think that ownership is a requirement. So basically, we brought that up to them and their attorneys, and we're basically going to see they're presenting a bunch of evidence to bring to the county and say, here's where we've done it elsewhere in New York State on the lease arrangement.
Okay.
But obviously, if we don't have an answer by Wednesday, that it's okay, good to go, then we're gonna have to wait on the pilot because it may modify. Any questions on that one? Next up then is the East River Road, Lehigh Station Road. That one, again, is, this one is 3, where it's basically the seeker determination, the mixed-use development, and then the multifamily portion of the mixed-use development. They're doing it as a phase. They're doing the multifamily first. You know, again, on the southern parcel, they've got a layout of what they would call the typical layout of it. I will note that it currently shows with the, they used to call it the East River Road Bypass Road, which is a road that would go in off of East River Road directly opposite the southern entrance to Riverwood Tech Campus. It would come around and connect through adjacent parcels. It would actually connect up to John Street, with the idea that both ends of that road would be signalized. It would provide for safer turns for vehicles. It would get those trucks out of the intersection of East River Road and Lehigh Station, where the grades make that a more dangerous intersection. And it should bring enough additional traffic to the John Street intersection to trigger a light there, which pre-COVID at the PM peak time, there were long lines for people waiting to make lefts to get out of there. And so I think a light would help there, but right now it's below the threshold. So anyway, that's something, it's drawn with that in mind. If that doesn't happen because of the other 2 parcels, then the county would want to offset that southwest entrance, because it wouldn't justify a light on East River Road. There's a light there now, but it's expected that that light is going away unless the bypass road goes in. The reason there's a light there now is because the northern entrance, you can't make a left turn out of the northern entrance. When that northern entrance is lined up with Lehigh Station Road, you'd be able to make a left out of there. So they wouldn't need the left turn out of the southern entrance. I just bring that up because there are people who, they want to know the stuff up front. They don't want to see it change, be surprised by a change down the road. So it's going to end up in 1 of 2 forms, depending on what the neighbors do. Right. Monroe County DOT is fully on board with us on all this. We've had numerous discussions with them, as with the developer. They all understand, but it's dependent on what eventually happens with the other parcels. Any other questions on that one?
Just once again, and I mentioned it last time when we, last time we talked about it for the mixed use, when we agreed to that mixed use, I had some idea of when they were going to proceed with the other development. I don't want them to see, build apartments and then, oh, we're not going to develop that other piece for 20 years. I just concerned about that they're.
Yeah, and right, and I get that, although, again, as we talked about at that time, people would love, right? People would love if, for instance, the western, so let's say the old Delphi building became apartments and the western parcel stayed empty for 40 years. You can't tell me our historic site committee and a bunch of people in the neighborhood wouldn't be ecstatic over that, right? So the key is that we made is part of that phasing is that it has to essentially stay in its natural state. It can't be turned into a sea of mud
So
and sit that way.
just out of curiosity to Mike's point is if the developer cannot develop it for some reason and decides to sell the property, does the mixed use development stay?
Yeah,
Obligations stay?
all
with
the
that?
obligations stay with that parcel. Absolutely. Yeah, it does, the obligations essentially are placed on that parcel and do not go away with the sale of the land. Anything else? 13 and 14, we mentioned were tabled. 15, basically it's the community development block grant. There's one spot on Chiltern, for whatever reason, when they built that subdivision north of the town hall, there's one low spot. And what happens is when it rains really heavy, the water to the east flows down the streets. And there's about 3 or 4 houses that end up with a pond in their front yard, making it difficult for them to get in and out of their driveway. Part of the issue is that the outlet for the drain pipe as it goes is into a creek. And as the creek level rises, the rate of flow out of that drain pipe decreases. And so we were able to get a community development block grant to put in a second pipe to increase the rate at which it outflows. There's also some additional work that we looked at further upstream to try to reduce the amount of water that runs down into Chiltern. Uh, 16, the contract for our cul-de-sac and pump station mowing is up. We've already done the maximum allowed number of extensions. So we're gonna have to go out to bid for that again.
I was gonna ask you, because I remember we put extensions on that.
We did.
And,
We've used them all up.
okay, is this one gonna have the same option for extensions?
Yes.
Thanks.
Pam has some items that are surplus. We've got 4 minutes if we want our steak.
We're not gonna get it.
There was somebody at 6400 West Henrietta Road. Long ago, they were approached about becoming a historic site. That letter got lost and never acted upon. The property owners found it and are interested in acting on it. So we're gonna call a public hearing. So I don't know, Becky, how many years later is it?
It should be in your packet there. It looks like the original letter was back in 2002.
So 19 years.
Yeah.
It's that time of year when Becky goes through obsolete town records, free up some space. That's number 19. We have a couple donations. The library. There 22 is our broker of record for commercial policies. Their contract runs, April to March. So we're renewing that. And personnel items, bills payable. Any old business? Can I get a motion to approve the minutes of the previous town board meeting?
I make a motion to approve the minutes from March 8th, 2021 of the town board workshop meeting.
Second.
Any questions, comments? Hearing none, please call the roll.
Councilmember Barley,
Aye.
Councilmember Stafford,
Aye.
Councilmember Safranik,
Aye.
Councilmember Bolsner,
Aye.
Supervisor Schultz.
Aye. Any other business? It's going to be a long one. I do think Maribeth has scheduled 2 interpreters so we don't break Terry's wrists.
Right.
And again, we're getting started early at 5:30. Hopefully with some of the stuff somewhat pulling out, that we'll have a little break in between, but we'll
Right.
see. Anything else?
Nope.
Can I get a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Hearing no objections, meeting